Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodreads, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me. Hi there, viewers. Today I'm joining in conversation with the Canadian author, Mrs. Macdonald Guenevere, the author of Schizoaffective Disorder, a Patient and Family Guide. Hi there, Mrs. Macdonald.
Good morning, Peter. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy, very much. I'm very, very happy to be able to be here and to share with you today.
That's great. So without wasting much of time, I would love to move straight into the interview. And I love this book, and I particularly want to ask you something about it. You know, you've experienced schizoaffective disorder. You've been a patient of this schizoaffective disorder, of this mental health issue. And I want to ask you specifically that, I know that it might be very, very difficult, the experiences, etc. And I'm curious to ask you that, what is it like to suffer from schizoaffective disorder? What is your experience like? What are the bad experiences associated with living with schizoaffective disorder?
It's very unexpected, I would say. You don't really know what's going to happen from one day to the next. I've had the disorder since I was very young. I was misdiagnosed for a great deal of time, but when I was younger and even now, you get the hallucinations that come out of the blue. You get strange noises that you're not expecting, that nobody else seems to hear. You see things out of your peripheral vision that aren't really there. So it makes it a very interesting disorder to deal with. A lot of people, when they get some of the more negative symptoms, and they can't get out of bed, they can't get into the shower, they can't function, they can't speak properly. So because it's such a diverse number of symptoms, you literally never know what you're going to get one day to the next. When you can make it several days in a row without any major issues, it's a big accomplishment. I'm actually on a new medication right now, and I've been relatively symptom-free for about 3 weeks now, which is a huge improvement on where I was before. So I used to dread getting up in the morning because I never know what the day held for me. Plus, you have your regular day, and then you have this on top of it. So you never know what it's going to be like.
Wow. No, it's actually, I've really heard about the illness, because when I read through your book, I made a lot of research. I particularly went to make some research so I can learn more about it. Okay, in the book also, you made mention about schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. I don't know if this term are somehow related to each other, or they are two separate entities. What are the difference between schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder? Do they represent the same thing, or they have different issues to address?
They actually have different issues. It used to be back in the DSM volume, in the third volume. We're on the fifth volume now, but in the third volume, that was the last time that schizoaffective disorder was actually listed under schizophrenia as a subtype. They've now changed it so that they are two separate disorders. And you find them on the schizophrenia spectrum. There's schizophrenia, schizoform, and schizoaffective disorder. And the big difference between the two is schizophrenia, you have hallucinations, and you have auditory hallucinations, and you have delusions. And that's the main makeup of that disorder. You can have a few other things in there too. But the big difference is when you get to schizoaffective disorder, you've got the hallucinations, you've got the delusions, and then you've got either manic depressive bipolar, or you've got clinical depression. So when they talk about schizo means break from the mind, and affective means the mood disorder. So the big difference is we have everything that schizophrenics do, but then on top of that, we have manic depression and bipolar episodes, and we can be hallucinating from the schizoaffective, but we could be having the manic episode where we're just go, but we're hallucinating and having delusions at the same time. So it can make it very dangerous if it's not treated. So you have to treat them, because otherwise you get that hallucination, delusion. You can usually deal with those a little bit, but you add the mania or the depression to it, and it's really bad. It's one of the worst mental health diseases. They still rate schizophrenia as the worst, but schizoaffective disorder is right behind it as being one of the worst disorders. And there's argument as to which one is worse. I personally would say schizoaffective is worse, but that's just me.
Wow, that's very true, because I was actually confused at first when I was reading about schizoaffective disorder and schizophrenia. I was like, I did really the same thing, because I remember I chatted you sometimes again. I was asking you, what's the difference between these two terms? Okay, that's great. I'm really excited to know about the sort of difference that exists between them. There's also something I find quite exceptional about schizoaffective disorder, the patient and family guide. And I think I read about a place where you mentioned, autism spectrum disorder. And this made me remember one of my friends' first novel, on the spectrum among the neurotypicals, which he actually wrote to detail its life experience, growing up with autism, more specifically in Africa, growing up with autism in Nigeria. And, one of the parts that I actually find very intriguing about the book is the fact that it made mention about the stigmatization of, autism spectrum disorder in the African scene, and most particularly about Nigeria, where it made mention about some people, some children languishing in silence. Some people are even, left undiagnosed, and some people are barbarically termed as being possessed by the devil or some sort of evil spirit, whereas they are suffering from autism spectrum disorder. You've experienced schizoaffective disorder, and I think there are some sort of relationship that exists between this autism spectrum disorder, because I remember while reading through your book, I read something about autism spectrum disorder, and I want to specifically ask you, because you've experienced schizoaffective disorder, is there any sort of interrelationship that exists between autism spectrum disorder and schizoaffective disorder?
Well, there's a number of things that come into effect with schizoaffective disorder. We have individuals who are on the autism spectrum who are also on the schizophrenia spectrum, and it used to be that it was you had this specific disorder, like you had autism or you had schizophrenia, and now they're finding that there's a little bit more involved in it, and it spans out. You can have symptoms of schizophrenia, and you can have them for about 6 months, and when you have them for 6 months, after that they disappear. Go upstairs, please. When they disappear after 6 months, then you're not considered to be on the spectrum anymore. Sorry about that. Whereas with the autism spectrum disorder, it's a very wide disorder. It includes a lot more illnesses than the schizophrenia disorder does. We have 3 known: schizoform, schizophrenia, and schizoaffective. So we have 3 known. On the autism spectrum, there's a lot more. But we also have people that are on both spectrums, which makes it especially difficult when you have schizoaffective disorder and you're also autistic, or you have ADHD or something to that effect. So it's really, really hard. It's one of the reasons why we say no two people have the same disorder, because if you have schizoaffective disorder, it's almost guaranteed you have something else underneath, whether it's autism, OCD, ADHD, personality disorder. I mean, there's a very wide range. I know someone who has about 16 different subcategories to her schizoaffective disorder. So it's very difficult look at the two and not make the connection, because they are connected. There's a lot of symptoms that are connected, and there's a lot of people that are actually diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum disorder when they're actually on the schizophrenia disorder. So there's a real correlation. They haven't put the two together yet. There's not a definitive way to introduce the two spectrums to each other, so they kept them separate. I do expect in the next DSM that there's going to be actually a lot more information available regarding both spectrums, because they've been putting so much time into research recently, and hopefully the pandemic hasn't ruined that, but they've really put a lot of research into the two spectrums in the last 3 years. So they're gearing up for a new DSM volume, and I'm hoping that it will actually clarify a lot more as far as neurodiversity goes with these disorders, because right now we don't have a lot of information, and it's confusing, and it's difficult for people who are in that seat trying to get diagnosed and not getting diagnosed properly. So the two are definitely related. We just don't know how they're related.
Wow. No, I've also heard about neurodiversity, and I'm not really I'm not really trained in this field. So from these books that I've been reading, I'll be able to gain and garner some knowledge about neuroaffective disorder and the other type. So I also want to ask you, based on your perception or from your experience of schizoaffective disorder, I want to ask you I don't know if schizoaffective disorder can ever be cured. Can it be cured? Is it curable?
No, it's a lifelong disorder, and some people find that, and it's strange too, because some people find as they age, it slows down and they're not as affected by it, but they're a very small group. A lot of people find that it actually gets worse as you get older. The big part of it is treatment. The longer it takes to get treatment and get your treatment sorted, the harder it is to live with the disorder. But it doesn't go away. There's no cure for it. They have no they have a couple of drugs that are like last resort drugs that can be used that work very, very well, but in the grand scheme of things, there's no known cure as of yet.
Wow. It's very, very shocking that this kind of disorder cannot be cured. It's so shocking. There's another thing I find very intriguing about your book, and that's a point whereby you wrote about your experience with hallucination, where a kind of a man appears to you and suddenly disappear. I don't know if this is a little bit related to spiritualism. I don't know, but I would just like you to expand on this particular experience a little bit. And I'd like to know if you still experience the hallucination to today, or it's something has changed, because I know hallucination is also one of those, symptoms of schizoaffective disorder. I read it in the ending part of your book that, schizoaffective disorder patients often experience hallucination. And I would love you to expand on, tell us more about your experience with hallucination, more particularly about a man appearing and disappearing.
Yeah. That particular hallucination scared me half to death. I didn't realize right off the bat that it was not a real person. It was only after I had fallen to the ground, and which of my own volition, and then realized that he wasn't there. It was a very it was a very unique experience, because to me it just looked like a man that was coming running up the road, until he got too close and I saw his face, and his face was all distorted and nasty looking, and he just kept coming running straight at me. When I fell down and I got up and he was gone, that was the point where I realized it was a hallucination. So I mean, it scared me to death. I still don't walk that direction anymore. I told my husband, I'm not walking down that way. No, we'll go walk the other way. He's appeared in the kitchen a couple of times where I've turned around and he's like right there in my face, and he's like, Rah! And I'll drop whatever's in my hand. I've literally fallen over, and it's not the only experience I have. And I've had issues with spiders that aren't really there, that are crawling on me. I get the sensation that they're crawling on me. I'll hear banging noises in the house. I'll hear people calling my name. On a regular basis, I have the sound of a crowded canteen or a crowded restaurant in the back of my mind, where like everybody's talking, but you can't make out who's saying what. I have a narrator in my head. If you've ever watched any of the BBC programs with David Attenborough narrating, David Attenborough narrates in my head. It's literally his voice in my head telling me, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm about to go here, I've already come there. I have other voices that argue and just talk about me in my head, and then they make all kinds of disparaging comments to me. So and it depends. I mean, those are my everyday hallucinations, but then I get like the odd hallucinations where there's like people, shadow creatures. They look like just black shadows, but they're very menacing. Again, the feeling of insects on my legs. I've been in the chicken coop and felt a chicken peck on my legs, only all the chickens had already gone outside. It can be the most minor thing. It can be sounds, it can be smell of smoke. My husband gets irritated because I wake up all the time in the middle of the night because I smell smoke, and I have to go search the house to make sure it doesn't burn down. And he's like, it's a hallucination to stay in bed. I said, yes, but the one time I stay in bed, it's a hallucination. The house will be on fire. So it makes it very difficult to balance the two, because I'm smelling smoke and it's very much a hallucination, 99.9%. But that 1% could be the one time the house burns down. So trying to work through your day and deal with what's going on in your head can be very, very distracting and very demoralizing. It's an adventure every day.
Wow, that's very fantastic. I'm so excited to hear about that. There's also something I find very enthralling about this book, and I think I need to commend you for the publication. It is very, very, powerful. And there's something you wrote in the preface section of your book, that you're not a doctor, and that this book should not be used in place of doctor's advice, etc. But I find something very interesting about the book. It looks like something that was written by a professional in the field of psychology or in the field of schizoaffective disorder. So that makes me very curious. And I was going to ask you if this book, because you actually wrote about a patient and family died. I know quite well that you've experienced schizoaffective disorder, but I was curious to ask you if this book was a total work of, research, or it's a work of, experience and some other things related to it.
It's a little bit of both. Because of my career path, my former career path, I'm very, very good at researching. And I have the type of personality that if somebody tells me something, I have to go look it up. So when I was diagnosed, I started researching the subject, and I didn't find exactly what I was looking for. So I made it a point to do as much research as possible to understand it. And when I got to that point where I had accumulated all the research, and I also did that because my husband needed to understand the disorder as well. So when I had it all piled up together and I handed it to my husband, he said, "No, I'm not reading that. Make a book." So I took everything. I took all my notes. I took everything that I researched, and I started compiling it, and did a bit more research and compiled some more, did a bit more research, compiled some more. And then he kind of looked at it and he said, "Well, you're not going to put your personal experience in there." And I thought, well, you know what? I'll put my personal experience in there, and I'll go over to my friends on this page and I'll talk to them and say, "Hey, tell me your personal experiences as well." So the book is actually made up of about 2-3 years of research, a lot of conversations with other patients, and my own personal experience.
Wow, that's very fantastic. 2 to 3 years of personal research, a lot of conversation with other fellow patient and from your personal experience. That's a wonderful combination. I'm very sure that some people will find it very interesting. Okay, there's another thing that I find quite absorbing about your book, and that's in page 105, where you wrote that it is important to note that no two individuals will experience this disorder in the same manner, and medication and treatment option affect every patient differently. I find this point very, I wouldn't say it's heart-wrenching, but it's very, very unbelievable. Because I was like, if she's affected, unlike in malaria fever or in certain kidney problem, liver disease, you will see the symptoms are the same in every patient. And that helps the doctor or the physician or whoever is going to attend to the patient to be able to, help and solve the problem medically. But in schizoaffective disorder, the case is a different thing entirely. And I was like, if this, schizoaffective disorder, what's it called, symptoms is different from one person to another, then how do you think that materials about schizoaffective disorder is going to help people? Is it going to be of advantage to people? Because if the sort of reaction or symptoms is different from one person to another, I think it will be very, very difficult for other patients to have a kind of, a guide about the book. So I want to ask you, how, if the thing is different from each other, how do you think that books and materials on this topic would be of advantage to patients on the spectrum?
It's a big deal. One of the things I did when I was writing the book was I tried to include as much information about the different symptoms and the different comorbidity diseases that are available. A lot of people who have schizoaffective disorder are misdiagnosed. And that's a major, major issue for us. For example, I've had schizoaffective disorder as far back as 15 years. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia then I was diagnosed with OCD, then I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And then finally, they kind of sat down and looked at it and went, no, you're schizoaffective. So you can have schizoaffective disorder and have the depression as your affective part. So you have your clinical depression and you're only manic every once in a while. Or you can have it with the manic symptoms where you're manic and depressive all the time. And some people have really bad mania. Some people have good mania and really bad depression. And some people just have the depression. And it's one of those things that it's a little bit different in every single patient. When you go, for example, when you're in the hospital, I spoke to another girl in the hospital who's got schizoaffective bipolar type, which is what I have. And she was talking about her experiences. And I told her, I said, I've never had that experience. And she was talking about how she felt that she was flying. She felt that her body was disembodied and that she was flying. And I've never experienced flying. But she's never experienced smelling smoke in the middle of the night. She doesn't get these phantom smells. So with each individual person, they became a bit of an enigma for the doctor. So they have to go through all the individual symptoms and look at it, because you can be schizoaffective bipolar type and also have OCD. You can be schizoaffective bipolar type and also have borderline personality disorder. I know one person who has borderline personality disorder, ADHD, autism, and schizoaffective. And it's like, what do you do as a person like that? You have to treat the symptoms. So they usually start out with an antipsychotic, followed by a mood stabilizer, followed by an antidepressant. But the antidepressants don't always work. So it's the whole concept of schizoaffective disorder is very challenging for physicians. It's challenging for individuals because it's very wide and broad, and you can have 20 people in the room and no two will have the same symptoms.
Wow, that's very serious, very serious. Then this point want to lead me to ask you another question, and that's, can someone suffer from schizoaffective disorder and not know that he or she is suffering from this disorder? Is it possible? What are the prominent, symptoms of this disorder, if that would help?
There are a lot of people who don't realize they have it, and they're trying to find out exactly what it is that they have. But another aspect of the disorder that some people have is that they're not aware that they're sick. They won't take their medication because they're not sick. And that is actually a symptom of the disorder. You will have people that will have that symptom where they don't believe they're ill. They don't believe they need medication. And oftentimes those are the people who need the medication the most. So it's, there are people that live with it for a long time. I've lived with OCD, the diagnosis of OCD for years. And then I got the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And they pulled that back and they said, no, you just have clinical depression. So I'm thinking I'm just OCD and depression. And then all this other stuff is going on. And I'm like, well, why is all this other stuff going on if I'm just OCD and depression? Because that doesn't fit the bill. So you go back to the doctor, who in turn diagnosed me as bipolar. Then you go back to the doctor and he finally said, no, you're schizoaffective. So because there's so much misdiagnosis, and there's also that actual feature of the disorder where you aren't aware of the disorder. I mean, there's people that are very aware, like me, and then there's people that aren't aware at all, and they're just like, no, I'm not sick. I don't need that. So it makes it difficult. It makes it difficult to deal with them because they don't recognize the illness that they have.
Wow. That's very difficult, honestly. So very difficult. I was going to ask you also, because while reading through your book, I read a part whereby you spoke about your next publication, and that's a Schizoaffective Disorder Self-Care Guide. I want to ask you about the progress of this publication, if there's anything about it you'd like to share with us.
It's in the process. I would say probably about 60 days it'll be ready to go to print.
Oh.
It's going to be exciting, sort of. It's actually a mix of not only the schizoaffective disorder book, but the 365 ways to be happy and improve your mental health book. So those two, there's aspects from both books that will be combined. So, but it's primarily on self-care for schizoaffective patients, because it's very, very difficult. A lot of them will go weeks on end without showering, and because it's a part of the disorder, you're so depressed and you're so hauled down that you don't want to get in the shower. And the shower is also very overstimulating because you've got sounds and the feel of the water, the sound, the smell, and touching and everything. And again, that kind of brings in the question of autism, because people are very, the tactile experience of taking a shower is very, very difficult for people with schizoaffective disorder. So it's a common trend. But yes, it is coming out hopefully before Christmas. Working on it hard.
Wow. Okay, that's great. I also want to ask you that, what are the sort of challenges that you face while publishing this book? And how long does it take you to get this book out?
It took me a couple of years worth of research, and then it took me roughly 6 to 8 months to write the book. And then once I had it written, I had to figure out what to do with it. So I went the route of establishing my own publishing company, and then publishing through having the print services done through Amazon. So the book publishes under my company's name, but it's printed by Amazon. So that was a bit of a challenge, because I had to go and find, but before I did that, I had to talk to other indie authors and find out, if you put your book here, what does it do? If you put your book there, what does it do? And there's all different kinds. And then I had people calling me saying, if you pay $10,000, I'll do your book. And I was like, go away. If I had $10,000, I wouldn't need to write the book.
Wow. Wow. That's great. It's very fantastic to know about that. I was also going to ask you, as an independent published author, sometimes marketing can be very difficult. And I
Mhm.
was going to ask you if there's any, medium you've utilized so far on marketing your book, and if there's any challenges you encountered in terms of marketing this book so far. I'd like you
There,
to share.
there is a number of challenges. One, the book is very specific. It's for a very specific reader.
Yeah,
Um,
generic.
it's not just anyone that's going to walk into the store and go, "Hey, what's schizoaffective disorder?" I'm going to read that.
Yes.
So you have that. You have a very narrow group. And fortunately, I'm on several groups of individuals who are schizophrenic and schizoaffective, and they have bought my book. And
Wow.
it just kind of goes by stranger really at this point, because that particular book sells every single day, and I have no idea who the people are that are buying it. I've tried doing Amazon marketing and Facebook marketing, and I ran into a very big wall, because the fact that this is about mental health, neither will promote, which I think they're doing it. Their comment is that they're doing it to protect individuals who have the disorder from being stigmatized further.
Oh.
But at the same time, what it's doing is it's keeping the books from getting to the individuals who need the book. So I have this ongoing battle with Amazon and Facebook about doing advertisements for my book because of that. Because apparently I'm not allowed to discriminate against myself.
Of course.
It's been rough, but right now it seems to be selling more of a word of mouth. And I'm hoping that the same people will come back and buy the second book, because it really elaborates on a lot of things that I didn't fit in the first book. But I advertise it whenever I can, wherever I can find advertisement. But I cannot get ads on certain sites because of the nature of the book, which, they're saying that they're trying to stop stigmatization, and I think they're actually increasing the stigma. So.
Wow. That's great. I personally know that marketing can be very difficult as an independent published author. It's sometimes, unlike one of the things that I do say that sometimes bad books that have good marketing do sell very well, and some books that are even very good, but they have some sort of bad marketing can just stay there without anybody discovering them. And I can also relate with you that Schizoaffective disorder is a specific book, not just that a book for everyone, but anyone who is also interested in knowing more about it, is a student of psychology, is a medical student. Those are the sort of people that would love to get it, and even literature into talks like myself generally. I really admire that, and I can resonate with it. So finally, I would love to have your word of advice for people who suffer from schizoaffective disorder. I know it can be very difficult. It can be very heart-wrenching. It's depressional, and it's one of those difficult, mental health issues that keep a lot of people. Some people can even go and commit suicide, because I remember I read in your book that schizoaffective patients are more prone and susceptible to committing suicide. So because you've experienced this, I want to have your word of advice to people who suffer from schizoaffective disorder. What sort of advice do you have for them?
My biggest advice would be to have a support group, whether it's a medical team or personal family members, preferably both. Have a support group, take your medication, follow through with your doctor, and make sure that you do your own self-promoting. It has to be, sometimes you have to fight the doctors and you have to fight the system to get the diagnosis. So you really need, it was one of the reasons why I wrote the book, is you really need to have information on hand. So when you do go to the doctor, you can say, look, I read this. What do you think? And I find that doctors are much easier to communicate with when they have patients who look out for their own issues, but who also have people who can support them and speak for them. And I fortunately have that. I have a group of family and friends, and I have a really good medical team. And I don't waste my time when I'm in those appointments with my medical team. I ask them every question that's in my mind, whether it's stupid or not. But definitely take your medication, have a support system, and work with your medical team.
That's great. That's very fantastic. I really hope that people that suffer from this mental health would find your advice worthwhile and utilize it. Thank you so much, Mrs. Macdonald, for the pleasure to have you featured on English literature. And here is a book, Schizoaffective Disorder, a patient and family guide. It's currently available for purchase on Amazon. Be sure to get a copy for yourself if you know anyone that suffers from schizoaffective disorder and any other kind of mental illness relating to it. It's very amazing. I love it while I read through it. I'm recommending it for you guys to check out a copy of Schizoaffective Disorder, a patient and family guide by Guenevere Macdonald. It's now available for purchase on Amazon. Thank you so much, Mrs. Macdonald, for the show. I really appreciate your time. You're taking your time out to attend to this interview.
I was happy to be here.